Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. A lot to get to this morning. Some really interesting economic trends, some of which point in opposite directions. We want to break all of that down for you. Quite fascinating data that is coming out. Also, the Supreme Court with a unanimous ruling on corruption, very much limiting what the definition of corruption even is. So that's interesting to dig into, as well as it involves a former Andrew Cuomo aide. So kind of a remarkable case there. We also have Trump hitting DeSantis on abortion and pro-life groups hitting Trump on abortion. So a lot going on there in the GOP primary. We have a bit of a reckoning within the diversity and inclusion industry and a totally nonsense piece from the New York Times that we got to break down for you. That Durham report, long awaited, is out with some pretty remarkable conclusions there and some pretty remarkable reactions from CNN. And we're also very excited because today, assuming everything works out and it's looking good, we're going to have a big sit-down interview with RFK Jr. right here in the studio, and we're getting a good amount of time to talk to him as well.
That's right. So RFK Jr. will be joining us here at the desk, the beautiful desk here in studio after the show. Here's how it's going to work. So as we've always promised our premium subscribers, they're going to get the first crack at the interview almost immediately after it's wrapped. We'll have it edited, and then we will send it out, publish it on the podcast, and send it out as an email to all of our premium subs. We will release a clip later today from the RFK interview, but if you want to watch the full thing first and support our work, our ability to convene, things like this, breakingpoints.com, you can become a premium member today. Otherwise, the full interview will be available for everyone tomorrow. And promises, and all that, we're not editing anything, we're not cutting anything.
That's right.
It will be the full uncut. There's no, there's nothing being done.
No funny business.
Effectively. No ABC News over here, which will cut out whatever he said. He can say whatever he wants. Whatever he says, we will publish it. By the way, YouTube, that's not necessarily an endorsement.
That's right.
He's genuinely one of the most censored people on the planet. So from where that comes from, it's not an endorsement, but we will publish it nonetheless. And if they decide to take it down, well, that's their decision. We'll make sure that it lives elsewhere for everybody to consume, because we believe in democracy here, not censorship.
Yeah, and we want to treat RFK Jr. just like we have other presidential candidates that we've interviewed.
Of course.
There's a lot of issues that I haven't heard him speak to that we want to get him on the record on and see what his thoughts are about how he would govern if he was, in fact, president of the United States. So big sit-down interview with him. Super excited about that. We're going to schedule one with Marianne as well. She's obviously been on the show before, but we haven't done a full, proper, let's dig into the weeds of what your agenda is. And of course, Joe Biden, you're always invited on the program as well.
Listen, I would love to make it happen. We put requests into the White House before. So
yeah, not holding my breath, but listen, we would love to do the same treatment with the current president of the United States.
And Trump
as well.
And DeSantis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100% interested in talking to all of them. All right, let's go ahead and get to some big economic news this morning. New York Times with a deep dive into some pretty fascinating migration trends, which are a stark contrast with recent history in terms of the United States. Go ahead and put this up on the screen. Coastal cities priced out low-wage workers. Now college graduates are leaving too. And what they're tracking here, and you can see on this first graphic, this is the San Francisco numbers. You can see those blue bars. For years, you had a net influx of college grads heading to the largest metros, these superstar cities that seem to be gobbling up all the wealth and all the top graduates from all the top schools. For years and years, that was the case. Well, just recently, that has flipped, and you now have net out migration from these top-tier cities of college graduates. Let me just show you some more of the numbers here from other top cities around the country, and then we can dig into why this is happening. So these are the numbers for D.C. You can see, again, for years, you had a net influx of college graduates. Now, over the past couple of years, really post-pandemic, you have net out migration. So college graduates leaving the very expensive, we can attest to, city of Washington, D.C. Let's take a look at the numbers in New York. Now, New York, this trend is longer standing. You have a lot of red here over the past decade of college graduates leaving this extraordinarily expensive city. And if we put all of this together, just put up this one last slide here, you can see there the number of college graduates who in recent years have been leaving the 12 most expensive large metro areas. But in other large metros outside of that top 12, they are still gaining college graduates. So It really is a very select phenomenon that reflects the extraordinarily high cost of housing and cost of just living in general in these top tier, most expensive cities in the whole country. And as I said before, this really reverses a trend that has been going on for the past several decades, where those cities seem to be a magnet for nearly everything. Now, with people, Saagar, I think in particular, having a kind of a, reset during the pandemic, not in the nefarious term.
Yes, that's right.
Version of the word.
Although
but,
maybe.
I mean, and people being sort of forced to rethink what their priorities in life were, forced out of the workplace. And now there's a positive side to this, which is a lot more workers, huge numbers of workers, having the opportunity to choose, do I want to be fully remote? Do I want to be fully in the office? Do I want to have a hybrid work model? That also opens up more flexibility, where it's like, why am I going to live in some tiny, expensive apartment in New York City when I can move to a second-tier city, a Louisville or an Austin, which still has all of these urban amenities, but is much less expensive, and I'm still earning my New York City salary.
That's right.
So many college graduates are making that choice, and it could have huge ramifications for, the future economy of the whole country.
I want to balance some of my thoughts here, and I've done monologues and stuff on this before. So first, let's start with the good and just the interesting. The good news is I believe in mobility, and I believe that ossified places like here, Washington, D.C., New York City, places where they still have these things called broker fees. If you are not from this area, Google it. It's one of the most insane things that exist in a
New
real
York
estate
apartment
market.
hunt.
Oh, it's madness.
Terrible.
You're just getting robbed left, right. And so, to see brokers out of their fees, I'm going to smile. Okay, so that's a good thing. Washington, D.C., New York City, San Francisco have family members and or friends who have probably lived in every metro area in the country in the last 5 years. That was the thing to do. Now, without fail, almost all of them have moved. Now, why did they move? And almost entirely, it's because of cost of living, crime, and just the general feeling that this is not the place that I need to be anymore, especially given the fact that I can get more bang for my buck outside. And this is having dramatic changes. Let's go to the interesting part, because interestingly, if just 10% of the white-collar workforce moves in some way in the next, let's say, 5 years, this is from Derek Thompson at The Atlantic, it will be the largest internal migration in the United States since World War II. So this alone, you cannot underestimate how much this will change everything, because internal migration doesn't only change the tax base of different states, it changes the political makeup of states. Arizona is going to become way more purple because of the incoming number of people, both from California, but across the entire U.S. Idaho, for example, Boise, Idaho had one of the most booming real estate markets in the United States because of its proximity to California. But let's not forget that with changing politics, not only changes electoral maps, that's how Atlanta and Georgia become purple as well, but also places like Ohio with net out migration are going to become more red. Here's the issue. By and large, this is only a white-collar phenomenon.
Right.
And actually, it's becoming worse for a lot of rural and working-class people who already lived in these set areas. Can we throw up the emerging divide graphic, please? The share of working Americans who moved in the previous year. Well, what you can see there is that in 2020, a massive spike occurred with those with college degrees, but the overall downtrend of the share of working-age Americans without a college degree has gone down dramatically after the pandemic. We are now around 12%, whereas above 15% about 15 years ago. The reason why that matters is that mobility for non-white-collar workers is incredibly important for them to also be able to take advantage of all of those benefits. So I am hearing story after story of, I lived in Charlotte my whole life. I was able to rent an apartment for, X number of dollars. Now all of these workers from New York City are here and I have to move 45 minutes out. I have to drive in and I'm screwed. And now I'm paying the same amount of money for less house or for a longer commute. I have to pay more in gas and I'm farther away from being able to save up from a house that was near my parents. I'm hearing this literally constantly from people who live in places like Charlotte or Boise or Phoenix or even, Austin at this point is like New York City, but let's even say San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, all these places had major internal migration over the last couple of years. I did a monologue in the past breaking down all those exact cities. Basically, if you live in the Sun Belt, like Atlanta or even in elsewhere, somewhere in Florida, you are going to have a real hard time if you did not get the same wage increase. You don't have the same mobility of the person who has a white collar thing. So we both have benefits, but we also have a lot of minuses.
Yeah. So the downside is that this creates an unequal situation where white collar workers they have the flexibility, they have the hybrid work situation or full remote situation. They can move wherever they want, but still earn the coastal city salaries that they were earning previously, or take, a relatively moderate cut off of those that's more than made up for by the cost of living going down in the places they're moving to. The downside is definitely, as you're saying, Saagar, that people who already live in those places, who are seeing housing prices now go up, now they're not matching the expense of like a San Francisco or an LA or New York, but they're seeing significant increases in terms of housing prices and other, other like just basic cost of living expenses. That's obviously going to be an issue for them. The other bright side, though, is that, we've had this incredibly unequal economic growth across the country. And it has fed a lot of, very divisive and polarizing politics, too, where you have these couple of superstar mega cities that are generating a disproportionate amount of the growth and the jobs and the economic activity, et cetera. And, for the working class people who have been living in those major metro areas, it's been a positive because the jobs are there. It's been a dramatic negative because the influx of all of those people has made the cost of living so wildly inexpensive that it's just completely insane. So there are also benefits to potentially having economic growth more evenly distributed across the country. And we don't have these graphics made, but if you dig into this piece, it's not just like the next tier of cities that college-educated workers are moving to. It's also small cities. It's also even rural America and small-town America. Now, this is a group of workers that, for better or worse, have been really catered to and sought after. Cities have gone out of their way to try to figure out, like, what if we create an arts district and attract this or that coffee shop? How do we bring in this group of people?
Shops are nice. Let's not get out of hand.
I'm not saying anything's wrong with coffee shops, all right? But, they've gone out of their way to attract this group of people. And it will be a benefit to the country if you have more evenly distributed, college-educated workers everywhere across the country, if you have economic activity being generated in more towns and cities across the country, and not just in these major metro urban areas. So, like you said, there's silver linings here. There's good, there's bad. More than anything, it's just fascinating to see the way that this could remake both our politics and also our economy. Even a small shift in where workers are going when they're coming out of college, what that looks like in terms of the national landscape can be incredibly transformative. I also thought it was really interesting, they interviewed some of the people here who had made this choice to move out of a New York City or move out of an LA, move out of a San Francisco. And they say for these high education workers, it's not so easy to separate those who can't afford a city from those who can but leave anyway. Affordability is relative and personal. For one person, it means making rent. For another, it means making enough to also join a gym, buy concert tickets, and dine out regularly. Even a professional who can afford all of that in New York may still eventually sour on the sixth-floor walk-up and the laundromat that comes with it. They describe things like, the people that have made this move mention wanting furniture that couldn't fit in a New York elevator, having a home office with a door that closes, not just cheaper housing, but washing machines, walk-in closets, and walls to hang artwork. So very different versions of affordability depending on where you are in that class and income scale.
Listen, I know people who make $500,000 a year who said that they just couldn't live in New York.
Right. And
I say, well, how does that work?
And
it's like, well, you can.
Yeah.
What you're really saying is I want to live in a 4,000 square foot house and I can't live in it. And hey, that's fine. And I don't want to pay for, whatever, X amount for childcare. Whereas if I live here closer to my mom, I can have a house and I can live near my mom and I have to pay for daycare. So my net quality of life is dramatically higher. I was like, totally. But it's like, just maybe don't say that you can't live in New York.
Right.
It's just that you don't want to live in New York.
Right. This is like.
And there is actually nothing wrong with that. The question is then, when X person moves home or near their house, well, and who would have bought that house? And they're willing to pay cash, whereas somebody else would have financed it. Well, then I can see why the people there are starting to get a little upset. And so I genuinely still think it's a net positive, just because as long as we can make sure, and this is literally almost like a trickle-down theory, as long as we can just make sure that some of this extra money goes into the local economy
Right.
and boosts spending and ability for local businesses and property owners and all that stuff to go up, and that the working class folks can still get some share of the pie, like, I think I'm good with it. But unfortunately, as we have generally seen, a lot of that doesn't end up happening. And then also, even in terms of the services that pop up, I was just looking yesterday, Manhattan is completely transforming the way that its tax base is working because 40% of workers are not back in the office. So what have they decided? They said Manhattan needs to become a playground for the rich. Basically, they're like, we need to turn this into the ultimate party destination for the people with these $500,000 incomes with no kids who just want to party 24/7. The ultimate entertainment destination, which will require us rezoning the city and making it so that we can capture our tax base. Because if we don't do that, we are going to lose a massive portion of the way that we fund city revenues. This is also a big problem with San Francisco, New York City, and all these places. Something like 1% of the population pays almost 40 or 50% of the tax base. That means that the services for the vast majority of the population literally relies on a few select individuals, and states are not federal governments. Like, you can't escape America. Even if you leave America and you're a US citizen, you still have to pay taxes. But if you leave New York City, you don't have to pay New York City taxes anymore. And a lot of them left. A lot of them live in Florida. So even if only 1,000 people leave New York City, if it's the right 1,000, it can screw you. So that's another reason why keeping your tax system based on that is actually very foolish. You want to. I'm not saying that those people shouldn't be taxed. I'm saying that you need to make sure that you are not so heavily reliant on a few thousand people, or you get the Eric Adamses of the world and the Kathy Hochul's who are like, we need to go back to the office. It's like, they're not saying that out of the kindness of their heart.
Right.
They need the money. If they can't do anything,
That's
if those
right.
people don't go to the office.
Yeah.
What if New Yorkers don't want to go to the office? Maybe you should work on their behalf, but they can't because the system is so screwed.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about there's a
Yeah.
real reckoning coming in commercial real estate.
I hope so, yeah.
Because, I mean, there are estimates that the value of commercial, like office space real estate, could decline by 40%.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an earthquake that is looming over the country, and half of the commercial real estate debt comes due in the next 2 years. This is multi-trillion-dollar economy that, you know, this is kind of hanging over our entire situation right now. So that's a big piece of this. There was one other part that I thought was interesting, which is they interviewed this economist who was talking about, you know, part of it is housing prices out of control. And by the way, we should say, like, the politicians that run these cities and states, they've had horrible housing policy. And this isn't like a right now phenomenon. This is like right now and over decades. And so that's part of what is pushing people out, is they're like, there's nowhere to live. It's wildly unaffordable, even on, you know, quite a hefty salary. Why would I continue to do this? So it's partly these cities have had terrible policies in terms of building out their housing stock to make them affordable places where people can live. That's one piece. But this economist says, you know, some of it is that the most expensive places got really expensive, but also the middle tier places became more attractive. This economist has found since 2000, college graduates have increasingly been moving toward high amenity cities and away from the highest wage ones. Consumer cities, as she puts it, are increasingly replacing producer cities as the places where college graduates want to live. Now, to me, that's obviously a trend that predates the pandemic. And as with a lot of the trends that we have tracked, I think the pandemic has accelerated trends that already were bubbling and already were in place. But I do think this reflects a sort of cultural mindset shift above and beyond, you know, the particular economics of one city or another, where people just have different values for what's most important to them. And that is being reflected in their choices of where they decide to live. And then these mid-tier cities, since they're trying to attract this group of people, they're building out the amenities that they would want that would make this an appealing place to live. So I thought it was interesting that it wasn't just like these places have become wildly too expensive to live and have these other problems, but also that the mid-tier cities have kind of stepped up their game and made themselves more attractive to a broader cohort.
The next big question is Starlink. When we have apps like America-wide high-speed internet, no matter where you are, that's when I want to know if stuff will really change. I mean, you saw some of this with the tech workers, people where Starlink has been widely available and you can do like Starlink for RV.
Yeah.
Some people were making like $500,000 a year living in an RV, just driving around wherever they wanted to, literally from national parks, like outside
If I
of a
didn't
lake.
have kids,
Now,
that would
I mean, it sounds like a
100%
life.
be me.
Let's be honest. Yeah, look, 10 years from now, maybe we can beam in from a studio or somewhere. I'm going to be in a compound somewhere deep in the desert. I love it out there, but the technology's really still not there in terms of reliability. That said, 10 years from now, I very much think that could be the case.
Yes.
Now, that unlocks economic potential of huge swaths, not only of the West, but here in the East Coast, which is much more densely populated. We still have a big rural-urban divide. We don't have a lot of Starlink or high-speed internet access, as you know, in rural areas,
Yes.
even, an hour and a half or so away from Washington, D.C., which to me is insane, but, from an infrastructure perspective. But who knows what that will unlock. It also will unlock a lot of the global workforce when you consider high-speed internet, no matter where you are, across the entire eastern seaboard, not only of the United States, but of South America, which will be on the same time zone. I mean, I've heard this from friends who are doing like the digital nomad thing, how people in Mexico City are so angry at all of these remote American workers, but not just there, Buenos Aires, like even Brazil, like any place where you can just get a tourist visa and still be on East Coast time or Central time. Apparently there are American tech workers who are down there. And remember, that's only like what, 1-2% of people who are even able to do that. If you just increase that to 10%, that's 10 times the number who are currently. That's millions of people who have basically total freedom.
Yeah.
Now, that's not everybody. Once again, a plumber can't be working from Buenos Aires.
Right.
So that's why you got to make sure that they're doing well.
That's true. But I do want to couple it
Yeah.
with the fact that, we talked about, was that in the show yesterday? Or we recorded this as an extra. It's going to post this weekend. That job satisfaction is actually an all-time high.
Sky high.
Across the board. I mean, we could obviously do a lot better in terms of wages keeping up with inflation. But you had a lot of people who, blue-collar or service sector workers, who shifted jobs during the pandemic, either because they wanted to or because they were unfortunately forced to. And they were able to get higher wages. They were able to get, and sometimes more predictable schedules and a greater sense of sort of control and autonomy over their days, which has contributed to a better landscape in terms of worker happiness. And to shift into this next piece, we wanted to just briefly show you in terms of where we are with the economy, because it is a very weird and complex picture. The recent jobs data just came out. Come on, go ahead and put this up on the screen. And job growth actually did accelerate in April. Wage gains increased solidly. They say this points to persistent labor market strength that could compel the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates higher. It's like, oh, we can't have those good times. We've got to screw people. I mean, this is always the weirdness of jobs reports during this era. It's like, this is a great jobs report, but it also is a mixed bag because it means that the Fed is going to be more determined to crush workers and screw them over and hike unemployment and kick a bunch, millions of them out of their jobs and crush their wages, et cetera. But, unemployment rate fell back to a 53-year low of 3.4%. They do note data for February and March was revised sharply lower. So important to note because these numbers could also ultimately be revised sharply lower. But it does show, even though you've had this issue of inflation, which has really impacted workers and made it so that many of them are seeing their paychecks eaten away and really getting like a net pay decrease every single month, you do have this tight labor market, which has made it so that workers can shift jobs and shift industries and, have some choice that they haven't had in a long time. So even though, the trends in terms of migration, that choice and the remote and hybrid work choice isn't there for blue collar and service sector workers, there are some positive parts of the labor market right now that are benefiting them as well. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.